My name's Biani. The weight of shame is not a foreign feeling to me. One of the most significant sources of shame in my life came from my perpetual sin of consuming pornography. Now, I don't remember necessarily the first time I watched it, but I remember not being able to look away, and at the time, I don't even think I knew what I was watching. I remember my mom finding out, and the feeling of shame that I felt was immediate and terrifying. And I promised that I wouldn't watch it ever again, but that didn't happen. For some context, I grew up in a Christian home, and like many Christians, I grew up going to church regularly and being very involved there. And growing up, I remember hearing many different leaders saying things like, men need to keep each other accountable for watching porn, and parents need to watch their sons' eyes from watching porn, especially with how accessible it is due to the internet. And these statements are absolutely valid and true. However, in my upbringing, I never once heard about pornography talked about in the context of women struggling with it. In fact, in my church, things like modesty and lust were exclusively talked about in the context of guarding the hearts of men and boys. And while this narrative, again, valid, it failed to allow space for women to talk about their own personal struggles with lust or ask for accountability. And this only pushed me further into my own shame. As I grew older, I still continued to regularly watch porn. I felt so isolated in my sin, and in a way, I viewed myself as being abnormal for being a female who struggled with this sin. And even though I felt shame over my sin, I still continued to perpetuate it because it was so concealed and hidden from everyone else in my life. In 2016, I applied to serve within a nationwide ministry that I had been a part of for many years. And during the interview, I was feeling confident about getting the position until my interviewer asked me her final question, which was, have you ever watched porn in the last 6 months? And I'll never forget the sinking feeling in my stomach. It took me back to the first time I had been caught for this sin, and I panicked and I lied and I said no. And I walked away from the interview feeling so sick with shame. Thankfully, this time I was convicted to the point that I asked for help, and I promised God that I would never watch porn again. And this time I took this promise very seriously. And through prayer and the grace of God, I broke my cycle of sin. And though I was able to move on from porn, I never fully addressed the shame I carried with me as a result of it. And it wasn't until over a year later that my close friend shared her testimony with me and shared that she used to consume porn too. And hearing this completely changed my perspective and made me realize that I wasn't alone in my struggle. And this realization allowed me to finally deal with my guilt and recognize that I wasn't abnormal and that God can remove every single ounce of my shame. And being free from this sin, it motivates me today to share my story. I want other believers, both men and women, to feel understood and be able to recognize that they're not alone. It's possible for them to live a shame-free life too.